So in this part of this experiment, we're going to be working with ultraviolet spectroscopy. You can find our ultraviolet spectrometer back here in the back corner of the lab. We actually have it hooked up to the same computer as one of the infrared spectrometers. Now, we've already gotten some familiarity with ultraviolet spectroscopy in our previous experiment, specifically when we did chromatography. Recall that in the chromatography experiment, if we had a compound that absorbed in the ultraviolet region, we were able to see that on the TLC plate using the UV light. With this instrument, we're getting a more formal measurement of that. So the way that we do this is we open up the Vision Light software. And then we're going to prepare 3 samples. The first one is a blank, and that blank sample is going to contain just methanol. So this first cuvette, we're going to fill up with methanol. And I'll show you a close-up of what this looks like once we're ready. But that goes in the spot marked B for blank. The other 2 samples are our terpenes. So we have 2 different terpenes, alpha terpenine and gamma terpenine, one of which is a conjugated molecule, the other is not. And so we'll see 2 very different things when we take the ultraviolet spectrum. Making up these samples is very straightforward. In some situations you might want to do this more precisely, but for the purposes of what we need in this lab, we're literally going to take 1 drop of the terpenine, and then fill the cuvette the rest of the way up with methanol. So this is our alpha terpenine, and we're going to put this in slot 1. We're then going to make a second sample with our gamma terpenine. Again, just 1 drop of the terpenine, or whatever compound you want to take a UV spectrum of. That's all you need in here is about 1 drop. Again, we'll fill the cuvette up to the line with methanol. So now, what we have over here is our sample. You can see we put our 3 samples in here. This is our blank. Our alpha terpenine is in slot number 1, and slot number 2 is our gamma terpenine. So now I'm ready to set this up to run the actual spectrum. And unfortunately this software defaults to some settings that don't really make a lot of sense. So we change the start to 200 and the end here to 400. If you forget that step, you won't get anything useful at all. Then we'll click on Measure Samples. And you can see the B is already marked as blank. That's the default for this software. And then we'll say that we have the alpha in position 1 and the gamma terpenine in location 2. And then we just click on Measure. And it will go ahead and measure our spectra for us. So the first step is for it to record the baseline, and then it rotates to each additional sample and takes its scans. And so you can see our spectrum is now showing up on screen. We will have to zoom out in a minute. It always, for some reason, it defaults to being zoomed way in on the spectrum, and then we have to zoom out in order to see the full spectrum. But we won't be able to do that until it's completely done running all of the samples. So once it brings us back to this screen, we know that we're done. And by double clicking, we can zoom out. And so what you should be able to see here, and I'll be posting this data on Blackboard later on, so that you can download this and do your analysis, but you can see we have two very, very different spectra. The blue line, which is down at the bottom, is our gamma terpenine, whereas the alpha terpenine shows us this large peak. And this is what we expect to see. We know that one of these compounds is conjugated, which means that it should show us a peak in the ultraviolet region. And we also know that one of these compounds is not conjugated, and therefore should not give us an ultraviolet peak at all.